Well, good morning, everyone. This is John McGlennon. I'm the president of the Virginia Transit Association, and I want to welcome you to our 2021 General Assembly virtual legislative briefing. We're doing things a little differently this year, as you know. Normally, we'd be at the Capitol and visiting with legislators and enjoying a reception later in the day. We're going to have to ask you to hold your appetite for a year, and next year we'll get you an extra special helping of barbecue to celebrate our return to in-person lobbying. We've got a packed set of panelists today who are going to be going through a number of important questions and issues relating to the General Assembly session, including how the session itself is going to work. Just wanted to make it clear to you that this is a webinar, and so we will not have the participants other than the panelists speaking on the call. But if you do have questions, you can submit them through the chat, and we will try to get answers to them as we move along. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, just because I do know we have a pretty tight schedule, and we've asked folks to be pretty rigorous in adhering to that. First, we're going to hear from David Blunt. David is the executive director of the Virginia Planning District Commissions, and he's going to give us an orientation to this legislative session, talking about the rules, the procedures, and the lay of the land as we move into General Assembly session 2021. David, let me turn it over to you right now.
All right, great. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this morning. Always appreciate the opportunity to partner with VTA on many different things and to talk about the General Assembly. So as John said, I'm kind of the scene setter this morning. So if you go to the first slide, you can see that we are 12 days into the 2021 version of the General Assembly, which right now is scheduled to be a 30-day session. You know, typically in odd numbered years, you have short sessions. This one's even shorter this year. As far as the operating resolution that we have, our crossover day when bills cross from the House to the Senate and vice versa will be a week from Friday, and then just another week or so till scheduled adjournment on February 11th, with the expectation that the governor is going to call a special session to convene to finish up work on any bills in the budget. So I included there in the last bullet, just so you would know, I said it's a shorter than usual session. Typically what has happened for the past 50 years, the General Assembly has extended the odd year short session to 46 days. But you can see there the Constitution language really calls for it to be 30 days. But since the extension requires a 2/3 majority vote, they did not get that this year. The Republican leadership in both the House and the Senate said that they felt like that 149 days of session during 2020, which was the regular session, and the summer and fall special session was probably enough, and that they could do business that they needed to do in 30 days this year. So they would not vote to extend. And so we are operating, as I said, off a 30-day session at this point. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little taste of what a 30-day session is looking like, we always have long legislative days no matter what. But this year, the schedule being different with the House and the Senate, I think, and Lisa could chime in on this as well, has made it a little bit more challenging for folks to be able to interact with the legislature. House committees are starting at 7 in the morning. They meet in 2-hour blocks. This is committees or subcommittees, so you would have a host of them going on at the same time. And they'll do that every 2 hours up until 3 o'clock when they go in caucus, and then the House convenes at 4 every day. Senate is pretty much on its same schedule with its committee meetings that it's had and actually had last year, I guess, in terms of the time frames that they operate under. They also are continuing to convene in their floor sessions at noon. Again, I mentioned we're likely to have a special session coming up at the conclusion of the 30-day regular short session. And then one of the other things that we have kind of on the radar, I guess, in the future is that there will be a special session on redistricting at some point in the spring. Not sure exactly when that's going to be. Folks at the state level are not sure when we're going to receive census numbers that would enable the redistricting process to move forward. So we know we have a busy 2021 through the course of the rest of the year coming up as well. Next slide. So one of the things that a 30-day session made for was some pretty tight limits on the number of bills that can be introduced by legislators. And in the House this year was going to be 7. They amended their resolution at the beginning of the session to allow for 9 bills to be introduced total by each member. And then the Senate, they set that number at 12. So, if you did the math on that, that would, I guess give you between 1,200, 1,300 bills possible. As of the end of last week, you see the number there. That number has gone up slightly to, I think, where as of last night, we're about at 970 some bills that have been introduced. Now, you add on top of that commending resolutions and memorial resolutions, study resolutions, and our total number of bills is just under 1,200 for the session so far. So typically in a short session, we would see about 2,000 pieces of legislation. So quite fewer number of bills this session to work with, and probably won't see too many more, since the deadline for legislators to introduce bills was this past Friday. The House of Delegates is meeting virtually. All those committees and subcommittees and their floor sessions are being done with each member either at their home. Some are in Richmond in their offices, but everybody scattered out all over the state. And then the Senate is in person in Richmond at the Science Museum of Virginia, but it's just the senators and Senate staff that are allowed to be in those facilities. Next slide, please. So that means for folks that are trying to interact with the process of the General Assembly, there's no in-person access. The Capitol is closed. The Pocahontas building where the legislators have their offices are closed. There is an opportunity to participate in the meetings of the committees and subcommittees through electronic means. They're streaming their meetings live, and then you can also sign up, register in advance online for both the House and the Senate to be able to provide verbal testimony during those meetings, and also are able on the House side to be able to submit written comments to bills that are before a committee or subcommittee. So that's presented some communication challenges and options again for folks like myself who have typically been used to being in person and interacting with the legislators. So think Zoom, think text messaging, think emailing, think phone calls. There's a lot of that that's going on. And of course, that's, we also need to consider, in addition to all the bills that are going through subcommittee and committee and the floor, there is a parallel budget process that's going on. And the members of the House and Senate money committees have just under 2 weeks in order to come up with the House and Senate versions of the budget and present those. And I know Jim will be talking about that a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So, my work also, John introduced me as the executive director for the Planning Districts Association. I also work for the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, which is Charlottesville area, and I represent the localities in that region on legislative issues. My message to them going into the session was to keep your expectations low, given the pace at which the General Assembly would be going. And that there would be fewer opportunities to have legislation introduced at your request, but to be on the lookout for opportunities to be able to amend other legislation or to tack on to some other bills. Certainly, relationships are key during this time. Always, but particularly during this time, and being able to have a relationship with a legislator or legislators, that represent your area. Or that you are familiar with, that makes it easier for you to communicate with them. And again, being able to text message or email, or to be able to call and have a phone conversation with them. So, messaging is very important. Keeping those messages and your conversations and information that you're providing to them very short and to the point, during a time in which their time is very valuable. Next slide, please. So just wanted to, I think maybe end, this might be my last slide, on just talking about some of the legislation that is out there, really kind of building on 2020. You see I've listed some of the really significant legislation that the General Assembly had approved last year in the areas of firearms and weapons. There was an omnibus transportation bill, a lot of activity in clean energy. For local governments, there was some progress on enhancing their local ability to generate revenues. There was police and criminal justice reform that was really the focus of the summer and fall special session that I had mentioned. So I don't really, we have a lot of important legislation this year. I don't think we're going to see the transformational type of legislation being moved through the General Assembly like we saw this past session. And of course, there is a lot of focus, on things related to the ongoing pandemic. So what we're seeing, and I will go over some additional specific legislation, but we are seeing some cleanup language bills from this past year's session, some things that were not successful that are coming back. Again, I mentioned the budget. There is going to be here, I think, in the next 3 weeks and maybe even longer, a lot of attention that's focused on the state's biennial budget for the next 17 months. And again, things having to do with COVID are also, I think, at the forefront of people's minds as we head through the session. So we just saw last week, to give you a few examples of the bills, and particularly with COVID, we saw last week the introduction of a couple of bills relating to vaccinations, and that would bills that would allow some additional flexibility and qualifications for medical personnel to administer vaccines. Probably one of the biggest issues that's grabbing headlines during the session so far has been the question of legalizing marijuana. There's a host of structural and legal and regulatory issues that are involved with that. So I think we'll probably see some small steps taken in that direction this year. I was looking at the subcommittee meeting agendas last week, and I saw one. They had about a half a dozen bills just related to casino gaming and sports betting. So those are going to be shaped a little bit more this coming session. There's more gun legislation kind of building on the bills that were passed during the 2020 session, and also some additional criminal justice legislation as well, building on the work that was done in the special session. In fact, over in one of the Senate committees this morning, they were talking about a bill to eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing. So never a dull moment at the General Assembly. A lot of legislation that will be flowing through in the next couple of weeks. So next slide, please. Just wanted to throw up there just some resources if you all receive these this slide deck. I think those are some clickable links to get you to information about bills at the Legislative Information System. There's also a very good website that has a lot of information about the state budget and that process. And then the budget highlights link there is, I think, the information that was put out by the governor's office when he introduced his budget to the General Assembly back in December. So, and there's my contact information. Again, I'm glad to have been with you this morning, glad to take questions at the appropriate time. And, if there are things that you run across later on, want to email me, give me a call, please feel free to do so. Thank you again.
David, thank you very much. You're always very informative with your presentations, and I know this is an extremely challenging environment in which to try to do that. So very helpful for everybody to get a better sense of the lay of the land. We'll turn now to Lisa. Lisa Guthrie is our executive director, who is going to talk about bills of interest and budget amendments of interest for us. So I'll turn it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, John, and thank you, David.
And let me just, sorry, Lisa, let me just make a reminder that if people do have questions, you can put them in the chat. Everyone except the panelists are muted.
Okay, thanks again. David was right. This is quite a different year and quite a different General Assembly session. And I think we're all relieved that we don't have a big omnibus bill to try to get through this session. But nevertheless, we do have some important bills that we want to flag to your attention today. So first of all, next slide, please. First of all, I want to highlight a little bit more about how the public can engage if you are inclined to want to participate in the process this year. The House of Delegates has created a House of Delegates Speak page. And if you are interested in submitting public comments or in testifying through Zoom, you go to this HOD Speak page and sign up. And they patch you through when it's your turn to testify. You can also submit public comments, written comments, so that all of the committee members will see it. On the Senate side, they do have a mechanism by which you can sign up to speak, but not submit comments. So you have to email them directly, or you can call them to their hotline number, which is on the screen there, and leave a message for your legislator. The House has something similar. You can call your delegate's office number in the General Assembly building, and the call, since they're not there, the call is forwarded to an answer call system there as well. So that's quite different. If again, you're not sure who your legislator is, go to the General Assembly site listed there, who's my legislator. So they're doing what they can to provide the public a way to communicate, and we're all trying to make the best of this. All right, next slide. So I'm going to go over some transportation specific bills. Not all of these are bills that VTA has a position on, but I want to flag some of the more important or interesting ones. The top priority bill that we're working on with a lot of the nonprofit community as well as DRPT is HJ 542, sponsored by Delegate McQuinn. And this is a study whereby DRPT would conduct a equity and modernization study and report, a 2-year study. And it includes a number of factors such as things such as capital improvements, electrification, a number of different aspects that would impact transit. So there's an accompanying budget amendment with that, and that will be going through the money committees. Then we have a budget amendment. We have a budget amendment for NVTC to receive an additional $30 million to make up for their shortfall this year in supporting WMATA. We're supporting that. Senator Spruill has a bill that would enable the Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads, which is HRT's commission, to add members of the House of Delegates and the Senate to their commission, and also requires that the non-legislative citizen members to have direct experience in transit, transportation, or land use planning. And HRT and VTA are supporting that. House Bill 2076 is a bill that actually is coming up today in Finance Subcommittee. And that is one that we are opposing because it is removing certain vehicles from being taxed with the motor vehicle sales and use tax. And as you know, in the omnibus bill last year, the whole funding structure was changed so that all of the transportation sectors, VDOT, DRPT, all of us have our funding determined from that. So everybody is rowing together, and if there's a reduction in funds, we're all going to experience that reduction in funds. This could potentially, for FY22, have a detrimental effect of losing $22 million for transit and rail. So we are very much opposed to this, and hope that some of our friends in local government will join us in opposing this in today's meeting. So typically, as you know, it goes to subcommittee in the House, and then it goes to a full committee. So today is the first step of that in the subcommittee, Finance Subcommittee, 1 o'clock. So those are the bills we have on here. We also have one that we have added that we are supporting, and that is Delegate Sullivan's bill, House Bill 2282. And that one pertains to the SCC conducting a report looking at electrification of transportation, including public transit. So we think that this is a good foundation for us to determine what the costs and opportunities are for that transition to electrification. So those are the bills that we have on our list right now. I'm going to go to other legislation. Just FYI, these are things that we don't have a position on yet. We could as the bills develop. But we have Senator Boysko's bill on transportation electrification, analysis of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is a big part of that transition. It's not just buying electric buses, it's also finding a way to charge them and establishing that infrastructure. House Bill 1893 and Senate Bill 1212 allows the New River Valley Passenger Rail Station Authority, creation of that. In Virginia, you have to go to the General Assembly to get authorization for things even at the local level because of the Dillon rule. So this is one that seems to be moving along quite well. House Bill 2054 is looking at transit-oriented development and local planning, and allows some flexibility in the local parking requirements. Here's one that probably DRPT is going to talk a little bit more about, and that is authorizing the CTV to waive the 25% cap for the TRIP program, or the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. And that was a part of last year's omnibus bill. Of that bill, some of it was to go to regional routes, and some of it was to go to exploring zero fares. And so this would waive that cap for the free fare or zero fare component of that. And so anyway, the other one is I've already talked about. We had a position on with Sullivan. So that's just a quick overview of where we are with tracking bills. If you are a member of VTA, we have a current bill chart that we maintain on our website. It's through the portal for Member Center Legislative Watch. You have to have a login to get in there. And that's just common sense that we just don't put it out there for everybody to be able to access that, because sometimes we have some folks who are opposed to our position, and we prefer to keep our talking points internally. So anyway, I see some questions have come in through the chat, and we will move through some of these others. And if those issues have not been addressed by the end of the webinar, we will try to answer your questions. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Lisa, for that summary. I think that helps us get a clear sense of what we're dealing with here. We're now going to move on to a video from Delegate Dolores McQueen. She's going to talk about her HJR 542, the Transit Equity and Modernization Study.
Hello, this is Delegate Dolores McQueen, and I wish I could see you all in person. But unfortunately, each of us are having to deal with the new phenomenon of virtually communicating. First, I want to thank all of you for your tremendous work that you have done, especially in this most unprecedented time. And I also want to talk to you all about one of my resolutions, and I think that you'll be interested in it. For decades now, our transportation system has created more pollution than the entire electric power sector. Nearly 50% of carbon emission comes from transportation. And sadly, most of this pollution ends up affecting African American communities and communities of color disproportionately. Keeping aside the obvious harm that this is causing our planet, this pollution has been linked to negative health consequences, like increased asthma rates, especially once again in Black communities and communities of color. We have the power to steer our transportation system away from its current path. It is time we update it to the 21st century. House Joint Resolution 542 will direct the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to study methods and ways we can modernize our transportation system. Not only will the study cover things like the environmental and health impact, it will also look to improve accessibility and affordability. A cleaner, safer, and more economically efficient transit system benefits everyone. Once again, especially in communities that are most disadvantaged. So we need to leave our world and our communities better than what we found it. And I am determined to help make that happen. And I believe it begins with the passing of House Joint Resolution 542. Again, I want to thank you for all of the work that you have done. I am hopeful that we'll be able to get this over the finish line, but I know that we cannot get it accomplished without your help. Again, I'm looking forward to working with you as we attempt to move House Joint Resolution 542 to its next step. Thank you. Hello. This is Hello. This is
Well, great. We appreciate very much the effort that Delegate McQuinn has been making on this important matter, and hopefully we'll see the joint resolution move forward and the study begin. We're doing great in terms of timing. Thank you to everybody for keeping right on schedule. We're actually a little bit ahead right now, I think, and get the opportunity to hear from the Chief of Transit, Jennifer DeBrule from the Department of Rail and Public Transit, and from Andy Wright, the Senior Legislative and Policy Specialist for DRPT. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you taking time out to talk to us about these matters, Jen and Andy.
Good morning, everyone. And
Thank you.
before I get started, I just want to send our thanks to Delegate McQuinn for House Joint Resolution 542. She reached out to us in December and brought up that idea to us and has been willing to work with us and take into consideration our thoughts and edits on the resolution. And I also want to thank Lisa Guthrie, who has been a great partner for us as we work together on that resolution and getting it in a way that we can move forward with the study. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Delegate McQuinn. I'll just repeat what a lot of people have said. This is, I started working in the Virginia General Assembly 18 years ago this month, and this is by far the most unique session I've had to experience. Unable to attend committee meetings in person, can't speak with legislators and their staff in person. I haven't seen many of my coworkers face to face in almost a year. One of the positives is I don't have to wear a suit and tie every day. For those reasons and more, thankfully, we do not have a big agenda for transit this year. But if you look back over the last 5 sessions, I think we deserve a little bit of a break. In 2017, DRPT pushed for the creation of the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. 2018, we advocated for $154 million in long-term capital needs for WMATA. That session also saw the introduction of transit reforms, including performance-based operating, statewide capital prioritization, and the urban strategic plans. 2019 was the year where VTA advocated for transitional assistance as the new performance-based operating assistance metrics were instituted. And then last year was what I saw was a once in a lifetime session for transit, new long-term funding for all transportation, regional funding in Hampton Roads and Central Virginia, and then of course the creation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. I want to speak a little bit about the omnibus bill and just the positive impact it's had on transportation, especially here in the middle of the pandemic. The post-session forecast in March 2020 stated that the omnibus bill was expected to generate nearly $500 million annually in new transportation revenues across all modes when fully implemented in FY 2024. Then, of course, the pandemic started. The August forecast stated that there would be a total reduction of $1.8 billion in transportation revenues from FY21 through FY 2027 when compared with the post-2020 session forecast. Specifically, we were looking at a reduction of $400 million in FY21 and $350 million in FY22 across all transportation modes. We then had another state forecast in December. That forecast stated that we would see, on average, $230 million less in transportation funding between FY23 and FY27. A lot of bad news there, but here's the positive spin on this. However, even with this reduction, the omnibus bill is still expected to generate $200 million in new transportation revenues across all modes when fully implemented in FY 2024. So while it is more or less quiet on the transit side, there is one big DRPT initiative that I want to talk about, and that's on the rail side. As many of you have heard, we are implementing our Transforming Rail in Virginia program of projects. This $3.7 billion agreement will one day separate freight and passenger rail service between Richmond and DC. There will be hourly Amtrak service between those two regions, as well as more VRE service, including weekend and late night service. It will also provide more service to Hampton Roads with a third train to Newport News. The so-called crown jewel of this initiative is the Long Bridge project. It is currently a two-track bridge across the Potomac River between Virginia and DC. During normal times, it is at 98% capacity during peak periods. Transforming Rail in Virginia will build a second bridge, providing 4 tracks into DC. The governor's introduced budget provides $50 million in general funds for the second phase of the Transforming Rail in Virginia project. This phase will include the following components: a second daily round-trip Amtrak service, which would stop at Roanoke, Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Culpeper, Manassas, Burke, and Alexandria, an extension of the existing and that second new train to the New River Valley, and improved freight and passenger rail reliability. The Commonwealth is currently engaged in negotiations with Norfolk Southern to finalize an agreement. The total cost is anticipated to be in excess of $200 million if the Commonwealth is able to reach an acceptable agreement with Norfolk Southern. Amtrak service along the US 29 I-81 corridor has been very successful to date, with ridership increasing 77% from its inception in 2009 to 2019. Studies indicate that 80,000 additional riders are expected to use this new service if this initiative were to move forward. We will ask if you speak to any legislators, please feel free to put in a good word for us with this initiative. And I will go ahead and turn the floor over to our Chief of Public Transit, my good friend, Jen DeBrule.
Thanks, Andy, my office neighbor who I have not seen in almost a year. Just happy to be with everybody virtually this morning. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on our perspective and plans for House Joint Resolution 542 and that study, talk a little bit about the TRIP program, and then give you an update on our strategic plans and some budget language that is under consideration for those. So starting off with House Joint Resolution 542, so pleased to be able to work with Delegate McQuinn on this study. The scope for the study is very broad. I can tell you that we're already working on taking all of the information that she and the group of stakeholders that she's working with want to see covered, putting it in some buckets: transit accessibility, the adequacy of infrastructure, emerging technology, transit electrification, safety, and system engagement and governance. I can tell you, I've talked to my counterparts around the country. I don't think any other state has undertaken an activity as broad-reaching as this. There are some examples of parts and pieces. So we're really excited to work on this over the next couple of years. We're very grateful to Lisa and Danny and the partnership that we've had with VTA to get here, and we're looking forward to working with all the transit agencies as we fully develop the scope for that study. And I will tell you, we are going to hit the ground running with that study. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. As it's been mentioned a couple times, there is a budget amendment that's also in the hopper to help fund that study over the next couple of years. Changing gears, I'm going to talk a little bit about the TRIP program. Obviously, this was a component of the omnibus bill that was passed last year. Certainly, everything that's happened with the pandemic has made getting that program up and running very quickly a bit challenging, not to mention the impacts that the pandemic's had on the transit industry. So we did not allocate any funding for TRIP in fiscal 21, but we are very much working towards being able to allocate TRIP funding in fiscal year 22. We have been working internally on the development of a policy. We issued a request for ideas back in November. We were very pleased with the level of response that we received to the request for ideas. And just last week, we held a couple of focus groups, one on the regional routes program and one on the zero fare low income program, part of the program, to get some input on, how to best develop that policy. We are putting all of that information together and anticipate taking a TRIP policy to the CTB later this spring that would then be subject to an open public comment period and implementation later this calendar year. We do envision, since we're already in our application cycle, that would be a kind of mid-cycle application process later in calendar year 2021. One of the things that we learned through the RFI is that there is a high level of interest in the zero fare low income component of that program, I think particularly due to the impacts of the pandemic and the experience that many transit systems have had with modifying their fare policies during this challenging time. About half of the ideas we received with the RFI were for zero fare and low income, which was, I will say, more than what we expected. So we have worked with Delegate McQuinn, and she has graciously submitted a budget amendment that would temporarily waive the 25% cap on the use of the TRIP program for those zero fare and low income projects. It is intended to be a temporary waiver to help mitigate some of the challenges that we've had around the pandemic, allow those regional routes type of projects to rebound as we start to get things back on more of a normal footing. So you can look for that budget language. We think that will help us kind of smooth out some of the challenges with doing this first round of the TRIP program. Last thing that I want to mention are our strategic plans. We had, if you'll recall, from the transit reform legislation a couple of years ago, the requirement for urban transit agencies to develop strategic plans. That bill language also required the CTB to adopt a schedule for those plans to be developed over a 5-year period. Obviously, the pandemic has made it quite challenging to envision the next few years of transit. And as such, we had the governor included a budget amendment that would temporarily waive the schedule or the requirements around those transit strategic plans, which gives us a little bit more time to work through the pandemic and with those agencies that have not yet started their process. I really do want to recognize that there are a number of agencies that have completed their strategic plans during this time: HRT, Greater Lynchburg, OmniRide, and others that like Alexandria Dash and Fairfax that are continuing to work on efforts that were started prior to the pandemic. But that language, I think, is important in giving us some flexibility to overcome the challenges that 2020 and 2021 have brought us. So we're excited. We've got a lot on our plates, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with you on not only the study, but TRIP and strategic plans as we go forward. I'll turn it back over to John.
Great. Thank you very much, Jen and Andy, for that detailed and informative presentation. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and know that you've been vital to us in terms of allowing some flexibility during these challenging times. Well, anybody who's involved in local government knows that the man to turn to for information about the Commonwealth's economy and budget is Jim Regenbaugh. I have to admit that the last time I heard him, it was so unusual for me to be hearing good news that I wondered for a while whether it was actually Jim. But I'm hoping that he's going to have some good news for us today on the transit front as well. Jim?
Thanks, John. I take issue with that. I'm always full of good news. I'm a half glass full kind of guy, and I'm going to give you that same feeling today because I actually think things are better than what is being forecasted. and I'll detail that in a second. But I'm going to start with a little bit of review. If you could go to the first slide of what happened last year because it was so important. So in the omnibus bill last year, two major things happened. First, revenues were raised in a significant manner, and the distribution of those revenues through the Commonwealth Transportation Fund was greatly simplified. And transit was a beneficiary of both of those, I believe. First, as this slide shows you, there was four major changes in transportation revenues. And first, motor fuel taxes were increased over a 2-year period, 5 cents increase starting last July, and this coming July, another 5-cent increase will occur. The registration fees that people pay on an annual basis for their vehicles was reduced by $10. You can see that. There was also an alternative vehicle fee that was added to collect revenues primarily from the growth in electric vehicles. And you can see the revenue generated from that, and that will probably grow. I'm sure that will grow over time. You can see the motor fuel, what it was expected. And I think this is important because as we get through this pandemic, I think these forecasts will start to become much more relevant and true. And so that 400 million a year after the full phase in of the 5 cents will probably be fairly accurate going forward, at least for the time being, while we still have primarily gas-fired engines. And then the regional tax was also important. Basically, the entire state is now covered with a regional tax that gets distributed to local entities. And you can see the amount that was estimated for that additional 7.6 cents to the rest of the state beyond Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And then, of course, Richmond got it as well. So next slide. So the entire state's covered with that regional tax. So effectively, our gas tax is now like 32 cents a gallon starting this coming July. So the next slide, so the other major element of last year's omnibus bill was to simplify the distribution of these revenues. And you can see that highway maintenance is getting 51% of the state Commonwealth Transportation Fund, Transportation Trust Fund, which is construction and capital outlay for transit as well, and rail is getting 49% of the total take for the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. And then furthermore, you see highway construction programs will get 53% of that 49% Transportation Trust Fund. And then Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund will get 23%. The Rail Fund will get 7.5%. And then you can see further down what the other funds are getting as well, including 10% of the Priority Transportation Fund. So next slide, please. And further, the distribution formula changes. That current in the left-hand column should now say prior, because actually starting in 21, we went to this new formula. And you can see how the funds within each type of mode is getting their construction funds distributed. So if you go down to the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, you can see how the various parts of the Mass Transit Fund are being distributed, with WMATA Capital getting the largest chunk of the largest system, 47%, non-WMATA Operating getting 27%, non-WMATA Transit Capital getting 18%, and so on. So next slide. Now, taking a look at what the revenue losses that occurred, I'm going to start with this slide. So what I give you in the left-hand columns is the actual, and then prior to the COVID pandemic, what it was estimated the Commonwealth to generate. And then you can see what actually happened in 21, which was a negative 122 million versus that pre-COVID forecast for fiscal 20. So there was a hit, in the last quarter of fiscal 20, the April, May, and June period, primarily $122 million hit versus what was expected. And then I've gone to the latest forecast, which was the governor's introduced bill in December, what they now expect 21 to look like versus that sort of original forecast with the new revenues. And so the current forecast out there now is for negative 278 million versus what was expected prior to. But here's the good news, John and everyone, is that the sales and use tax figure, I believe, is low. And I think everyone is recognizing that our goods-based economy is actually held up quite well. Goods-based, I'm sorry, not economy, goods-based sales tax is held up quite well. There's been a service sector recession. People have been buying lots of things, including things for their house, durable goods. Online sales have exploded. And so sales tax has actually been positive, not negative. And I would not be surprised if fiscal 21 sales taxes are actually up 5% versus the original forecast back in the late spring and early summer was negative 10% for 21. And then it got that negativity got reduced in the introduced budget in December to negative 2.6. Everyone's realizing now through the first half of the year, we're actually up 6% right now over the prior year. And so don't be surprised if maybe there's a little drop off, but don't be surprised if it's up 5% or at least positive. And so that forecast will be above the actual 20, not below the actual 20 for 21. And it could be up, 70, 80 million above what they now expect, what they expected in that introduced bill. So that will reduce that negative 278 significantly. So next slide, please. That's my good news. So finally, this chart is reflective of the official introduced forecast of that negative 278 for 21. And so if that did come to pass, you would see the Commonwealth Transportation Fund to lose 72 million, and you would expect the Mass Transit Fund to lose 31 million, the Rail Fund to lose 10. But I think that will be moderated somewhat, not completely, by the increase in sales taxes that will occur, I believe. And so it will not be as bad as this. And we do, with the, our economies are recovering. I'm confident that the latter half of calendar year 21, we're going to see significant economic improvement in our state and country. There's been a lot of savings. Business actual debt has actually been reduced. People have paid down their debt. I think people were going to love getting back out. The two prior speakers have indicated they haven't seen each other in a year. They will start seeing each other after they hopefully get the vaccine and things start coming back to normal. It may be the roaring 20s all over again, at least for the time being. And I think our economy is going to improve. And I think those forecasts, those original forecasts, will prove to be fairly accurate going out in 22, 23, and 24. So I think that is the good news. We've had a temporary big hit to our economy, but we are coming out of it. And the sales tax on goods, at least, shows that things aren't as bad as we thought. So that concludes my presentation, John.
Jim, thanks very much. That's you really packed a lot into that presentation, and appreciate it very much. I just hope those roaring 20s don't finish the same way that the last one did. But maybe we've learned a few lessons from that. We're really fortunate now to have Senator David Marsden, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, join us. Senator Marsden has been a great advocate for transit, and we really appreciate his taking time out to talk to us a bit today. And I see in the picture here that he's already making sure that Virginia gets the attention of the federal government Department of Transportation. Senator, thanks for coming, and we're looking forward to hearing you.
John, he was on, but he jumped off. So I don't know if he is still around.
All right. Well, maybe he's meeting with Mayor Pete as we speak. Hopefully, if he comes back on, we can slot him in next. But should we move on to your presentation, Danny?
Sure.
Okay, so Danny, our Deputy Director of VTA is going to be talking about the rail bills and the Faces of Transit and Voices for Public Transit e-action.
Thanks, John, and thank you all for having me. In addition to my role with VTA, I'm also the executive director of Virginians for High Speed Rail, kind of bringing the advocacy together of both the rail and transit. And so I wanted to build a little bit off of what Andy was talking about a little bit earlier. Virginia is really kind of leading the nation in regard to rail investments. And so both VTA and VHSR are very excited about the new $50 million in the governor's budget for the expansion of the Virginia Piedmont corridor and the extension of service from Roanoke to Christiansburg. Over the last decade, the state has made significant progress. And before COVID, we had 4 of the top 6 best performing routes, regional routes in the entire nation. And John, Newport News was number 2 behind Lynchburg. So folks from Williamsburg and Newport News really enjoyed taking the train. So we're excited about the opportunities that the governor's Virginia Rail Initiative that he announced in 2019, what that means for all the additional service on the Urban Crescent as well as out to Southwest Virginia. So there are 4 items that we're all following. Obviously, the governor's budget, the $50 million in the House budget and the Senate budget, HB 1800 and SB 1100. It's item 443H. That's where the $53 million is dedicated. And we've reached out to a lot of our legislators, encouraging them to support that funding, to make sure that we get the full benefit of the Long Bridge investments that the state is making. We're also following HB 1893 and SB 1212, which is allowing the New River Valley the creation of a passenger rail authority so that all the different governments, Virginia Tech, Radford University, can all come together in the creation of their own passenger rail station in New River Valley for the extension of those regional trains. So these are very exciting initiatives. I hope you will all stay informed on these, and thank you all for everyone who's reached out to your legislators in support. And so very exciting times for passenger rail in Virginia, especially, I think, just building off of what Jim just said. I think a lot of folks, there's a lot of pent up demand for travel and for getting back out and seeing family and friends when the pandemic is over and when everyone gets their vaccine. And so I think congratulate the state on making these investments and positioning Virginia to be prepared when the pandemic is over. They give Virginians an opportunity to get back out there and travel and see the state. So a couple of other items that VTA is focused on. We've launched our Faces of Transit campaign, which really brings together multiple individuals from across the state talking about why transit is important to them and their communities. These are educational videos. We have, I believe, over a dozen different partners have co-signed on this campaign. So I encourage everyone to check out the videos. They're only about 2 to 3 minutes long. They've been viewed thousands of times on YouTube, and you can find the videos and join the campaign and learn more by visiting our page, facesoftransit.org. And we hope to expand this program over the coming year. And then also we have partnered with APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, to launch Virginia Voices of Public Transportation. We've brought the resources together of VTA and APTA to make sure that Virginians, whether they're focused on the national or state level, all see the benefits of public transit and have an opportunity to hear their voice be heard. And that's very important in today's day and age when our General Assembly for the first time is gone completely pretty much virtual. And so this type of action alert and opportunities to stay engaged and keep informed are incredibly important. So I hope if you're not already a member of our action advocacy, you sign up at virginiavatransit.com/action. And so those are 2 opportunities to get involved and learn more about programs that VTA is doing to showed the importance of public transit across the state of Virginia. Thank you, John.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. And we really do appreciate you bringing these advocacy opportunities to our attention, because it is critically important that we stay engaged with our legislators and with our partners in state and federal governments. I did want to just check to see if we had some questions in the chat. Was there anything that anyone would like to respond to?
Yes, there's a couple of questions about bills, John. We don't have the senator back on, do we, Danny?
I don't see the senator,
Okay.
no.
So there's a question from Zach Trogdon about fare-free, zero fare being an appropriate topic for HJ 542. I certainly think that that could be a part of the overview. Jen, do you want to respond to that as well? I think that the whole equity piece would certainly call for that to be taken into account, but those have not specifically been addressed, but there is a component, Jen, if you want to talk a little bit more about that with the equity. We can't hear you.
It's the dreaded 2021 double mute. So that has not been specifically called out in what we've scoped so far, but I think it's a great suggestion that certainly it's a key element of any discussion of equity, and we can certainly weave that into the scope as that scope is being developed right now. So great suggestion, Zach.
And I would say that in terms of the buckets on the study, that taking a look at that transit accessibility is one of the buckets, so that would certainly fall under that, as well as the other buckets. If we were going to break it down to let you know, would be adequacy of transit infrastructure, transit electrification, implementation of emerging technology, safety, and system engagement such as governance, workforce, underserved rider representation. So those is a broad expanse of topics that this work group would be taking up. All right, there's a question here about House Bill 2054. I haven't worked on that a whole lot, but the summary said that that this bill would adds reducing, modifying, or waiving local parking requirements or ratios to the strategies that may be included when certain larger localities consider incorporating strategies to promote transit-oriented development in reviews of their comprehensive plans. So, so it looks like it is statewide, but I would keep an eye on the bill tracking at leg1.state.va.us. You can enter in any bill number and learn the status of it, as well as see the language in the latest rendition of the bill. Okay. Let's see, scrolling on. Question from Jason Stanford to all panelists. What are we hearing about the budget amendment providing 30 million in general fund money in FY22 to help NOVA localities pay their WMATA subsidies? I don't have any update on this. Typically, budget amendments are heard by their respective money committees toward the latter part of the session, but I have not spoken to anybody on those committees at this point. If there's anybody on the webinar here that knows something, please put it in the chat box. All right. There was a question about the volume with Delegate McQuinn. We're hoping, we are recording this, and we're hoping we'll post it in a couple of days up on our webinar section of our website. Hopefully you'll be able to turn up your volume to the max so that you can hear it. That's just a technology issue of we played it as loud as it was, but hopefully you will be able to turn up your individual computer louder, and we'll be able to catch what you didn't hear the first time. All right. Let's see. I think one question's already been answered about strategic plans. Here's a question. Does Senate Bill 1126 require commission members to ride modern public transit? I have no idea. I don't think that there's any language that requires anybody to ride, but certainly they have to have some transportation experience. And so I guess they could make their case that that was experience. So I don't have any other questions at this point.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. Exact status of HJ 542. It got through the Rules Committee and has been re-referred to Appropriations. So it will go to, let me see where I put it. I think it'll probably go to the Transportation Subcommittee of Appropriations. Let me check that. Yes, Appropriations Transportation Subcommittee. So we will, if once it goes, if it gets through Appropriations, we will certainly send an alert out through our Voices network, asking people to weigh into that. And that's the easy thing about participating in our Voices e-action network, is that just by participating, you get that alert, it automatically goes to your correct delegate or senator, and in this case, delegate, and we make it as easy for you as possible. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much,
That's
Lisa,
it. Mhm.
for all those responses. And I want to thank everybody for showing up today. We had about 70 participants today in the webinar, and that's a great indication of support. We know it's a challenge to lobby the way that you might normally, or to keep in touch with your local legislators, but in some ways, maybe if they're in the House of Delegates, they're home anyway, and so you can catch them in your community. Quick save the date. Remember that the 2021 VTA Conference and Expo will be held at Tyson's on September 28th and 29th. So be sure to put that on your calendar. With that, I will thank you for your participation. We're finishing up a few minutes early, so you can get on with the rest of your day. Appreciate all that you're doing for public transit.
Thank you.